After that golden buzzer night, millions believed Courtney Hadwin was living her dream. The voice, the moment, the standing ovation that stopped the nation, it all pointed to one destination: superstardom. But behind the screaming crowds and the record deals, something much quieter was breaking. The girl who transformed on stage was reportedly struggling to exist off it. The full story of what really happened has never been told, until now. Peterlee is not the kind of town that appears on tourist maps. It sits in County Durham, in the northeast of England, old coal country, working-class roots, communities that have been quietly rebuilding for decades. The streets are not glamorous. The expectations are not excessive. It is the kind of place where most people live ordinary lives without the world taking much notice. It was here on June 26, 2004, that Courtney Hadwin was born. She was not a loud child, not demanding, not the kind of child who drew attention to herself by filling a room with noise. Friends of the family have described a girl who moved through her early years almost at a remove from the world around her. She preferred the silence of her bedroom to the chaos of a schoolyard. She preferred old records to whatever was playing on the radio. The music she connected with most deeply, Janis Joplin, Otis Redding, the ragged soul and blues of a different century, was music that most children her age had never heard of. That set her apart. And in the social world of a British secondary school, being different carries a price. Sources close to Courtney's circle have described her school years as genuinely difficult in ways that went beyond ordinary childhood friction. The bullying she reportedly endured was not the casual, occasional kind that many people survive and eventually forget. It was consistent. It was targeted. It followed her from year to year, attaching itself to everything that made her unusual: her quietness, the way her body moved, her complete disinterest in mirroring the behavior and interests of the children around her. Classmates reportedly found her strange. Those in a position to intervene were not always watching the right places at the right times. The corridors, the school grounds, the spaces between lessons where this kind of cruelty tends to operate without interference. There was no dramatic turning point that made it stop. No single moment of rescue. What there was instead was music. Her family reportedly noticed it first. A voice that did not belong to the size of the body producing it. When Courtney sang, the weight that seemed to press down on her in every other setting simply lifted. The girl who could not hold eye contact in conversation could hold an entire room when she opened her mouth. Biographers and journalists who later examined her early years described it not as talent in the ordinary sense, but as something closer to a displacement, as though the life she could not quite live in ordinary spaces was being redirected entirely into what came out of her voice. Her family reportedly did not try to analyze it. They simply supported it. They drove her to events. They encouraged her to keep going. Whatever was happening when Courtney sang, they understood on some level that it was the one place where their daughter was fully, completely herself. What those school hallways never anticipated was that the girl they overlooked was only months away from standing in front of millions. Have you ever felt like the real version of who you are was completely invisible to the people around you? Leave a comment below, because Courtney Hadwin's answer to that question changed the entire course of her life. The Voice Kids UK first aired in 2017. It was designed as a competition for children, polished, cheerful, the kind of show that British television runs well. Coaches turned their chairs. Young performers delivered well-known songs. The format was familiar, and the results were usually predictable. Courtney Hadwin was not predictable. She was 12 years old at the time of her audition, turning 13 that June. She stood on that stage the way she stood in most public spaces, still taking up as little room as possible, eyes aimed somewhere between the floor and the panel in front of her. And then the performance began. Those who saw it live and those who watched it afterward noted something that was genuinely difficult to categorize. The voice was beyond the body producing it. The movement that came with the singing, loose, instinctual, completely at odds with the contained girl who had walked out moments earlier, left an impression that was hard to dismiss. She did not win the Voice Kids UK, but she was noticed. Her family reportedly worked carefully during this period to keep her life as stable as possible. They understood that what happened when Courtney performed was real. They also understood the risk of pushing too hard, too fast, on a child who was still reportedly navigating the ordinary social pressures of growing up in a small town where she had never quite fit in. Those close to the family described a household that was protective without being restrictive. They wanted her to sing. They also wanted her to remain a child for as long as she could. Offstage, Courtney remained the same quiet, inward person she had always been. Those who knew her during this period have consistently described the gap between the two versions of her as striking. In conversation, she was reportedly difficult to draw out. In school corridors, she remained a target. But place her in front of a microphone and the transformation was, by all accounts, total. No hesitation. No visible self-consciousness. No trace of the girl who reportedly struggled to walk into a room full of strangers. The two versions of Courtney Hadwin were not contradictions. They were the same person operating on entirely different frequencies. After The Voice Kids, the conversations around her reportedly shifted. Those close to her began considering what a next step might look like. Several names were discussed. Several options were weighed. And then one name kept returning to those conversations with a persistence that was difficult to ignore. America's Got Talent. A producer reportedly came across footage of Courtney sometime in late 2017 or early 2018. According to sources familiar with the process, the response was immediate. There was reportedly no hesitation on the production side. They wanted her. The preparations moved forward quickly. Nobody warned Courtney that the stage she was about to step onto would alter her life, but not in all the ways she expected. The summer of 2018 brought the live auditions for America's Got Talent Season 13. The stage was set before crowds of thousands. The judges' table was in position. The atmosphere was the kind that competition sets are specifically engineered to produce, a manufactured electricity that sits in the air, waiting for something real to cut through it. Courtney Hadwin was 13 years old. She walked out to the center of the stage wearing simple clothes, her hair loose, her arms close to her sides. She moved the way she always moved in public spaces, carefully taking up as little room as possible. The four judges, Howie Mandel, Simon Cowell, Mel B., and Heidi Klum, watched with the composed attention of people who had collectively reviewed thousands of auditions. The audience applauded with the polite encouragement reserved for unknowns. Nobody in that building knew what was about to happen. The opening notes of Hard to Handle, originally recorded by Otis Redding in 1968, began to play. What followed has been described by journalists, by people who were in that room, and by viewers who watched the footage in the days and weeks that followed as something that television rarely captures with any honesty. The instant the music reached her, Courtney's posture changed. The contained, careful girl who had walked out seconds earlier simply ceased to exist. In her place was something with total physical authority. Her arms swung wide. Her hips moved. Her head dropped back. The performance was not constructed in the way that competition acts are typically constructed. It was raw in a way that stopped the room completely. Her voice was the thing that no one in that theater could fully account for. Blues singing of that caliber requires something behind it, a weight of lived experience that shapes the timbre of a voice from the inside out. Courtney Hadwin was 13 years old and had somehow produced that sound. Vocal coaches and professional performers who reviewed the audition in the weeks that followed reportedly struggled to explain it in technical terms. The certainty of it, the places it went without effort. These were characteristics that most singers spend entire careers developing and many never fully reach. Howie Mandel hit the golden buzzer before the song had finished. Gold confetti fell from above and covered the stage. The crowd was already on its feet before the final notes resolved. Courtney stood at the center of the falling gold with an expression that reporters present that evening described as somewhere between disbelief and shock. Not the polished emotion of someone who had rehearsed this outcome, but the genuine confusion of a child who had not yet processed what had just occurred. The clip was online within hours. Within days, it had reached tens of millions of views. Within weeks, that number reportedly passed 100 million. Television critics referenced Janis Joplin and Tina Turner in their coverage. International outlets that rarely covered American talent programming ran full articles. By the end of that year, the audition had reportedly accumulated over 200 million views worldwide. Courtney Hadwin was no longer a quiet girl from County Durham. She was a global phenomenon, and the machinery of fame had located its next subject. It began to move without pausing to ask for her consent. But machinery does not stop to check whether the person caught inside it is doing all right. If the stories the music industry works hardest to keep quiet are the ones you need to hear, subscribe to this channel. Because every week, another story like Courtney's gets the truth it has always deserved. The live rounds of America's Got Talent are a different experience from the auditions. The auditions allow a performer to arrive, deliver one extraordinary moment, and leave. The live shows demand something else entirely. Consistency across weeks, press availability, the ability to perform under conditions of mounting public pressure while millions of viewers vote on whether the journey continues or ends. Courtney Hadwin was 13 years old at the start of those live rounds, turning 14 at the end of June. She performed week after week. The material she chose continued to reflect her instincts. Raw, rooted in an older tradition connected to the soul and blues that she had always understood better than anything contemporary. Sources who observed the production during this period noted that she carried herself professionally throughout. She did not fall apart under the pressure. She did not miss a mark. By every observable standard, she was performing at a level that could not reasonably be expected of a teenager in her first significant professional environment. The audience continued to support her. The online response to each live performance was substantial. At certain points during the competition, sources close to the production have noted it appeared genuinely possible that Courtney Hadwin would become the first international teenage girl to win America's Got Talent. That did not happen. At the end of season 13, the winner was announced as Shin Lim, a close-up card magician from Massachusetts whose performances throughout the season had been, by the consensus of critics, among the finest in the show's entire history. He was a worthy winner. The result was not an error of judgment or a failure of merit. But for the millions of fans who had followed Courtney across those months and built an emotional investment in her story, the outcome landed heavily. For Courtney herself, sources close to the situation have noted that the second-place result was complicated in ways that were difficult to express publicly. By rational measures, finishing second on America's Got Talent is an extraordinary achievement for any performer, and particularly for a 14-year-old from a small English town competing against professional adult entertainers. But rational measures are not the primary currency of a global talent competition. An expectation had been established. A narrative had built momentum, and the narrative had a specific ending in mind that the result did not deliver. What made the situation more complex was that the external pressures had not waited for the finale to begin arriving. Industry representatives had reportedly been in contact with Courtney's team before the final votes were cast. Conversations about recording, about touring, about the architecture of a professional music career were reportedly already underway. They accelerated significantly after the finale. Significantly and quickly. Courtney Hadwin was a teenager who had not yet finished secondary school. And then the record labels arrived, with contracts that promised everything and schedules that left very little room for anything resembling a childhood. Maybe you have watched someone genuinely gifted get absorbed by a system that was never built with their well-being in mind. Courtney Hadwin's story is that feeling made visible, and it matters that people take the time to talk about it. The record deal was announced with the fanfare that follows major competition finalists. Reports in the weeks after the finale linked Courtney's name to Epic Records, one of the largest labels in the world. Press coverage framed it as the logical continuation of her story. The next chapter, the beginning of the real career, the moment where the promise of that audition would finally be fulfilled at the scale it deserved. What those press releases did not communicate was what a 14-year-old from Peterlee was now being asked to carry. The music industry at that level operates according to a logic that is largely indifferent to the personal development of the people it signs. Release schedules are built around market windows, and streaming algorithm cycles. Promotional timelines are structured around radio formats and platform behavior. The question of whether the human being at the center of all of it is psychologically equipped to carry that weight is not typically the first item on the agenda. Singles were released in the months that followed. They received coverage. They moved reasonably on streaming platforms. But something was reportedly not connecting in the way the audition had connected. The power of Courtney's original performance had come from a very specific place. The unpolished, instinctual rawness of a girl performing from the deepest part of herself, without calculation or commercial awareness of any kind. Sources familiar with the creative process during this period have noted that the direction the label was reportedly pushing toward was different, more produced, more shaped toward contemporary formats, adjusted for a market that Courtney had never actually belonged to and had never expressed any interest in belonging to. The friction this created was reportedly quiet at first, not loud enough to generate headlines, not severe enough to produce a public break. But those with proximity to the situation have described it as persistent and cumulative. An artist who understood precisely what she was being asked to move away from, and who was reportedly unwilling to do it without significant resistance. Courtney was not willing to become something she did not recognize. That position carried practical consequences. Output slowed. The promotional energy that labels typically direct toward new signings begins to redistribute when momentum stalls below expectation. Touring that had reportedly been discussed at considerable scale did not materialize. Her social media presence, which had grown substantially during and after the competition, became progressively quieter. The conversations between her team and the label reportedly grew more difficult with time. The fans noticed. The comment sections beneath her older videos, still accumulating views in the tens of millions, began filling with questions. Where had she gone? Was she all right? What had happened to the girl from that night in 2018? By 2021, the teenager whose audition had gathered hundreds of millions of views was reportedly navigating a career that those watching closely could only describe as quietly disappearing. There is a particular kind of disappearance that happens to young performers after the television cycle ends. It does not arrive with an announcement. It does not happen suddenly. It moves the way light leaves a room when no one is paying attention, gradually, then completely, until the space where the brightness used to be feels different in a way that is difficult to name. For Courtney Hadwin, that disappearance settled in sometime around 2021. New music became rare. The releases that had marked the first years after the competition stopped arriving with regularity. Social media accounts went quiet for longer and longer stretches. Industry observers who tracked the careers of talent competition finalists noted the shift without ceremony. This kind of trajectory is not unusual. What made it notable in Courtney's case was the distance between where she had started and where things now appeared to be. Very little of what was happening privately during this period has been documented in the public record. The absence of documentation is not the same as the absence of experience. Sources close to the situation, speaking carefully, have described a young woman navigating the particular weight of having been made globally famous before she had the tools to fully understand what that meant. The challenges that Courtney reportedly brought into the experience of fame were not new ones. She had reportedly dealt with social anxiety long before any camera found her. She had spent years reportedly unable to connect with ease in ordinary social environments. The attention of a talent competition had not resolved those challenges. It had, by most accounts, made them considerably more complex to manage. There is a conversation the entertainment industry consistently declines to have about what it means to take a child with a rare ability and place that child at the center of a global media moment. A conversation about what support structures are actually in place. About the difference between managing a career and protecting a person. About what happens when the press cycles end and the labels redistribute their attention and the audience moves on, leaving behind a teenager expected to figure out the remainder independently. Courtney Hadwin has not disappeared. That is worth stating clearly. In the public statements she has made in recent years, She has spoken with a directness that is, by any measure, remarkable for someone who became a global phenomenon at 13. She has indicated a desire to make music that is genuinely her own, to stay connected to the sound she actually loves, rather than the sound the industry attempted to build around her name. She has reportedly continued to write and record, moving at a pace and in a direction that reflects her own artistic judgment. The voice has not gone anywhere. That same weight, that same quality that stopped a room in 2018 remains entirely intact. The industry did not take that. It never could. But the version of the career that millions imagined on that golden buzzer night has taken a quieter, more honest shape. Not the shape the label designed. Not the shape the competition narrative demanded. Something closer to the truth of who Courtney Hadwin actually is, and who she has, through everything, been determined to remain. And somewhere in County Durham, the girl who once silenced an entire nation with a single song is still working out what the rest of that story is supposed to look like.